Well, good morning and welcome again. We are so glad you've joined us today, especially if you are a guest and you came to celebrate Easter with us here at Long Hill Chapel. We're so glad that you did. My name is Michael. I'm the lead pastor here at Long Hill, and it's a thrill to be among you this morning as we celebrate this greatest event in our faith, the resurrection of Jesus Christ, which is not just an event. It's not just an excuse to go have brunch with your family and dress them up. And you should totally take advantage of that picture thing in the back. You dressed your kids up this morning. That took a lot of work, and we recognize that. So get a picture and celebrate your accomplishment. But we celebrate Easter because it means that we have hope. And in a world where hope so easily seems like such a fleeting thing, the moment you turn on the news, that is such a critically important thing. And that's really what I want to talk about today. When I was in high school, and maybe when you were in high school, we would have pep rallies. And a pep rally was when all the cheerleaders, all the sports teams, and in my school, the band, they'd get together in the gym, and we would go, rah, 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 we are awesome. I don't know if you had pep rallies in school, but that's basically what it was. You know, our sports teams, they're better than your sports teams. Rah, rah, go. There was someone who dressed up in whatever goofy mascot your school had. We had one of those. They'd parade around the room. Everyone would be excited. We loved it because it was a chance to get out of class. But really, a pep rally is just when you're celebrating how awesome you are. And really, when it comes to the church, sometimes Easter can be sort of like a pep rally. It seems like that for Christians. See, you know, we come in, and maybe you don't come to church every week, but you come in on Easter, and we're talking about how our team is the best, how we have the best team, and we try to get you to join us. And one of the things that really struck me as I was reading again this very familiar story for most of us, you know, even if you're not a church person every week, you kind of know the outlines of what you're going to hear on a Sunday like this in church, is that for the original people who were facing this day, this day that we now know as Resurrection Day or Easter, they were not having a pep rally at all. They were not celebrating in the way that we celebrate. They weren't saying he was risen indeed. They weren't parading around and talking about how their team was the best. In a lot of ways, it was like the day after. Have you ever had a day after? There's something that happened the day before, something big, and not necessarily something good. The relationship ended. You lost the job. You got the medical diagnosis. A loved one passed away. Something came to an end. And there's this thing that happens the day after, where if you're anything like me, you wake up and for just a moment, everything seems okay, and then it hits you. Then the reality hits you of what's happened. There's that blissful moment, and then you remember that everything has changed. And so the people who were facing this first Easter were waking up much more like that. They were waking up wondering what exactly had happened these couple of days before. And so as much as we're here and we celebrate this Resurrection Day, most of us, in some way, some of the original folks around the story that we're somewhat familiar with didn't even know. They weren't aware that it had happened, because this Easter event is so public for us. You know, there's egg hunts and there's brunch specials and there's sales, and you can't avoid it. It shows up on your calendar automatically. But for them, it was quiet, it was uncertain, it was unknown. And that's what those day after days are really like. They're quiet, they're uncertain. You're trying to figure out what you do next. You try to get your bearings. You begin to try to pick up the pieces. Now, I want to be clear, starting over in a day after doesn't have to be a bad thing. I remember when I packed my car to go to college for the very first time. It was a 1989 blue Ford Thunderbird, not a very practical car, but I packed everything in it that I possibly could. I took some boxes, some clothes, all the things that I could bring, because I was moving out of a place and I was starting a new season of my life, which would change everything. And sometimes when we begin these new adventures together, it feels great to leave some things behind. It feels great to leave a place behind. It feels great to leave a set of circumstances behind. It feels great to look up ahead with what feels like a clean slate and begin over again. But sometimes it's not so great. I had lunch with a dear friend a number of years ago out in California, and he was reflecting on a season of his life where he had invested years of blood, sweat, and tears into a situation, and it just all fell apart. And he sat there, and I'll never forget, we sat having lunch overlooking the Pacific Ocean. He said, I felt like I just wasted 11 years of my life. Some of you have had a starting over that feels a lot like that. You invested the energy, you invested the love, you invested the time, you put your heart into it, whether it was a relationship or a job or just something that you thought was going to go some way and it didn't go that way. And now you're left and you're trying to figure out, what do I do now? How do I start over? And so today we're going to look at an Easter story, but maybe not the story that we're all familiar with of the women coming to the tomb and discovering the empty tomb where Jesus' body had been laid, and then the disciples finding out bit by bit, and the word of this spreading. We're going to look at a story that happens subsequent to those events. It's an Easter starting over story, and it's in the Gospel of John, chapter 21. And a gospel is really just an account of the life and the works of Jesus. But this is something that happens after the events that we've sung about today. And the story goes like this. Afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were together. So these were some of his very closest followers, his inner circle. I'm going out to fish, Simon Peter told them. And they said, we'll go out with you. And the reason they do this is because a lot of these guys had been fishermen or they'd been around that before. And so they went and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. I don't know if you've ever started over. You're like, I'm going to do something. I'm going to do a thing that I know how to do. And they go back to it and nothing good happens. And you're like, can I do anything anymore? That's kind of like how it must have felt with these guys. But when they start over, when you start over, when you and I do this, we go back to what we know and we go back to what we need. We try to make some sense of that as soon as we possibly can. Maybe when you start over, you start out with something that brings you comfort or certainty. Maybe that's what Peter is doing here. Or maybe it's more like this. Peter's saying, I'm done. Because a few years before, Jesus had come along and he'd called Peter, and the first time he called him, Peter wasn't really into it. He was following, in the family business. He was a fisherman. But finally he signs on and he begins to follow Jesus with his life. He follows him around and he sees all the events, and his picture of what the future is going to look like begins to change. It begins to look positive. It begins to say, I'm not stuck in this life that I thought I was. Something better is coming for me. And then it all falls apart. And maybe you can relate to that today. Maybe you can relate to that where you thought it was going and it's not going. And so Peter says, guess it didn't work out. I'm going to go back to what I know. And the despair and even the embarrassment of a moment like that must have been overwhelming. Because I don't know if maybe you've come to the end of a relationship. And it's all the people who come by and they're like, hey, how is so-and-so doing? And you're like, well, that's actually not a thing anymore. Or the job that was your dream job comes to an end for whatever reason. And you have to walk back what everybody thought, or, where your future is headed, the place you're going to go to school, the thing you're going to do, the way you thought it was going to work out. There's just this level of embarrassment that's involved in that. But the story here is not over. Verse 4. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. Again, one of the reasons they didn't realize it was Jesus is because nobody thought that the events of this day, they thought it was done, it was over. This idea that Jesus would have been raised from the dead just seemed like a distant, fleeting hope. He called out to them, friends, haven't you any fish? Meanwhile, they have not caught any fish. No, they answered. He said, throw your net on the right side of the boat and you will find some. Professional fisherman, random dude on the shore giving advice. Maybe you've worked at your job and you're struggling against the thing and someone shows up and they have no idea what you actually do, but they're there to help. They're there to give you advice. We've all had one of those well-meaning advice-giving people who has actually no qualifications to give the advice in our lives. And it's like, no, I don't need your advice. Just like, go away, go somewhere else, bother somebody else. But Jesus gives them some advice. He says, throw your net on the right side of the boat and you will find some. And when they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of a large number of fish. Here's what's interesting in this story. Is this account right here parallels another part of the encounter between Jesus and Peter at the very beginning when Jesus called him. And it was the same sort of situation where they're out in a boat and they're trying to catch fish. And Jesus, says, put your nets down for a catch. And they're like, no, it's not going to work. You don't know. You're not a fisherman. You're like a guy who is a religious guy who teaches and stuff. And we do this day in and day out. And they do it. And he catches a whole bunch of fish there too. And what's beginning to happen is Jesus is beginning to post these signs, these signposts that only Peter, only the disciples would recognize and begin to put things together. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved, by the way, that's the guy writing the story. His name is John. Isn't it great to be able to describe yourself in whatever way that you want? He said to Peter, "It is the Lord." So he's starting to put it together. As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, "It is the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he'd taken it off, and he jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish you've just caught." And so Simon Peter climbed back into the boat and dragged the net ashore, and it was full of large fish, 153, very specific count. But even with so many of them, the net was not torn. And then Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." And Jesus got really mad, and he said, "You'll get what's coming to you. I'll never let you forget this." No, that's not what he said at all. He invited them, you're breathing a sigh of relief. He invited them to breakfast. In my role as a pastor, I have a good number of meals with people, probably more than many other people do. And I'll just tell you something. Breakfast is the one that I reserve for people I want to build a relationship with. I'm still waking up. They're still waking up. This is not the time to break out the bad news. It's not the time to have the hard conversations. It's not where you break out the complaints. And so Jesus invites all of these people who had followed him, and just so we're clear about this, when everything went sideways, had all abandoned him. They'd all disappeared. They'd run away. Peter himself had denied Jesus 3 times, but everyone scattered. Nobody kept the faith. And the thing I love about this story is that it shows us that even when we've given up, even when we've thrown in the towel, Jesus has not. Even when we've said, "I don't believe anymore, I can't hope anymore, I don't see it anymore," Jesus pursues us, he follows us, and he invites us back. And that is such good news for all of us in this room today. So Jesus invites them all to breakfast. By the way, this isn't like, hey, it's the happy ending. I imagine this was kind of awkward because they knew that they had all run off. Peter knew that he had denied him. Everybody knew that they'd been like, "Oh, yep, I guess it's over. I'm out." And now Jesus is back. We have this phrase that we use. It's in these awkward moments, the elephant in the room. I don't know if you've had a conversation or a meeting or a gathering or some kind of thing where you're trying to make the small talk, you're trying to keep it pleasant, but you know that there's this thing that's going to come up. You know that there's this issue that needs to be addressed. It's really awkward. Somebody did something or something said something happened, and everybody knows it. That's what this is. I think often we assume that our lives are closest to God when things are going well. That when, everything is up and to the right, everything makes sense, the sun is shining, the numbers are going in the right direction, that's when God is closest to us. And I think this is actually the case that it's the opposite. The Bible tells us that God is closest to us in our weakness. He's closest to us in the moments that feel like failure. He's not far away. So here's how this goes. None of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" because they knew it was the Lord. Jesus came, took the bread, and gave it to them and did the same with the fish. This was now the third time that Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said. "You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time, he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." And there's a little bit of a parallelism here because if you remember back in the story before, you've seen the movie, if you've read the Easter account, you know that Peter, before Jesus was crucified, he denied him how many times? 3 times. And so Jesus comes back using the same number, and he's not rubbing it in. He's restoring. He's not rubbing it in. He is allowing Peter to be restored in this moment. It says Peter was hurt, and it could be because Jesus asked over and over again. It's like when someone, you're like, "Do you love me?" And you're like, "Yes, I do love you." And you ask it several times, and they're like, "I guess you don't believe me." But maybe it's more that Peter made the connection in this moment to what Jesus was talking about. And Peter was known as this brash, like shoot from the hip kind of guy whose mouth ran so far ahead of everything. You know someone like that. Maybe you are that person where your mouth gets out ahead of you. And it's almost as if Jesus is forcing Peter to sit in the moment, to realize what is true. And so Jesus is so intentional with this. It's like a journey. It's like Jesus is confronting him with a reality, but not to condemn him. And here's the good news for us. Jesus doesn't look at where our track record is. Thank goodness he doesn't look at where my track record is. He looks at where our hearts are. But then he gives Peter a job. He gives him something to do. Feed my sheep, feed my lambs. In essence, he's saying, you thought you were starting over, and you're right, because you are, but not in the way that you expected. Listen in. Jesus said, "Feed me, feed my sheep. Very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." Jesus said to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. And then he said to him, "Follow me." So Jesus predicts the future course of Peter's life. He says, in essence, the road you've been on will prepare you for the road you're going to be on. The place that you've been before, even if it's felt like it's come to this awkward, difficult ending, is the way that will prepare you for where you're going. And then he says the thing that he started by saying all the way back in the beginning of the story where he first encountered him, he says, "Follow me." And some of you today, you're looking at your life and you're just like, it's gone nothing like I expected it to go. My circumstances have not turned out in any way that I planned that they would. And all of us, in some ways, big or small, can relate to that. Maybe you look back at the past year of your life and you're just like, that was nothing like I thought it was going to be. And into this moment, Jesus steps for me and for you. And he says, "Follow me. Follow me. The road is winding. The road is uncertain. The future, you can't predict it all, but you can follow me and you can put your trust in the one who knows where the road leads. You know, you and I, most of us in this room, we don't have boats filled with fishing nets. We don't have bait and tackle. We don't do this professionally. Maybe one or two of you does. But we don't have these things like that we pick up and return to when we're starting over. We usually have something much smaller. We usually have something that looks like a box. Some of you have packed a box your last day in a job that looks kind of like this. Some of you, if you've been moving out of a place that you've lived for years and you're turning into the future and it's an uncertain future, you've packed up a box. But whenever you pack a box like this, what you usually do is you go through it and you put in the things that are necessary for the journey. You know, and maybe things like, you know, pictures of your family or your kids, you put that in the box. Things that kind of are mileposts or signposts for what you've done and where you've done, awards, plaques, documents, projects that you've worked on. You put some evidence of that in the box. Valuables, you put those in the box. Things that you need or you think you need for the next season. If you've ever moved out of a house, you've said, you know, when we've moved a few times, there's like, you start with the organized boxes and they're really well labeled. The last time we moved, I think one of the last boxes we packed, you know, my wife Grace, we were packing it, it said something like, Grace's important stuff and things. And so that's not just her. I had a bunch of those boxes myself. But it gets down to the point where you're just putting stuff away, but you always start packing by saying, what do I really need? What are the things I need tomorrow? What are the things that I need next? And so boxes like this, when we pick them up, when we pack them, when we open them, they are these interesting things that are reminders of what has been and hopes for what will be. The reminders of where we've come from. Their hopes and expectations for where the journey is going to lead, where we hope it's going to lead, where we think it's going to go. But I think for all of us, with our literal boxes, and maybe even the ones that we have in our minds and our hearts, because there's a version of that too when we pack up, when we start over. Jesus is saying to us today, maybe this could be the chance for you to allow me to do some things with the stuff in your box. Maybe this is the chance. You think you know what's going to happen. You are starting over. But just like Peter in the story that we read, with Jesus, there's a start over that is not the one maybe that you expected, maybe the one that you hoped for, but it's the one that leads to life, and it's the one that you and I desperately need. Jesus is saying, maybe if you gave me the stuff in your box, I could do something different, something that has a greater impact, that leaves a better legacy than what you ever could have imagined when you look at what's in your box. Because all of us in this room have parts of our story, parts of our experience. For some of us, they loom larger than others. Where we look up at God and we look around in the world and we say, what in the world could God or anyone do with this? But Jesus comes to us and he says, follow me. Maybe there's something greater I want to do with your hope, with your expectations, with your skills, the relationship that you're clinging so tightly to, the relationship that you want to end, the relationship you wish you had, your memories, your wishes, your fear, your failure, your hurt, your baggage. Maybe for a few of you here, your box it's not filled with regret at all. It's filled with accomplishment, success, achievement. You've lived a great life. But as you've gotten over the next mountain, you've cleared the next hurdle, you've gotten the next rung up on the ladder, those things haven't brought the kind of satisfaction that you thought that they would. Maybe Jesus is asking, what if you let me have a go at the stuff that's in your box? But like Peter, Jesus does not meet you. He doesn't meet me with condemnation or with judgment, even if it's what we think we deserve, and even like in the story that we read, if it would be the right thing. Maybe all Jesus is asking of you today is something like this. Do you trust that what I want to do with the stuff in your box, with what is in here, with the contents of this, is enough? And maybe not even that it's just enough, but that it's actually better. And that all comes down to trust. That Jesus is the ultimate start over. Earlier in the same book that we've read from this morning, the Gospel of John, Jesus is talking, and he says this about himself. We've heard maybe these words, a few of us, before at funerals, but it's where Jesus is talking about who he is and the hope that he brings. And he says this, he says, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? And there's a bunch of layers to this. The ultimate layer is putting our faith and our trust in Jesus as our Lord and Savior, the one who died on the cross for our sins, which we just remembered a couple days ago on Good Friday, but then rose to life on the third day and defeated the power of sin and the power of hell and the power of death, so that there is no condemnation for you if you are in Jesus Christ, because you've been set free from all of those other things. And so that's the ultimate cosmic version of putting your faith in Jesus. But I think there's a bunch of smaller versions too. It's saying that this thing that's in my box that looks dead, there's one who can raise it to life. This thing in my box that looks meaningless, that just looks like suffering and difficulty and struggle, there's one that if I will follow him with it and give it to him day after day after day, can give me a life that is abundant, that may not have been the one that I expected or the one that I thought I was going to have, but is the one that means the most and lasts forever. So Jesus, by what he did on Easter, is the one who takes all of the things in our life, who just look like the pieces have crumbled. They've fallen apart. It doesn't make sense. Nothing good can come from this. So I'm going to go back to what I know, or I'm just going to live small and I'm going to try to get through, or I'm going to try to find purpose. Jesus is the one who comes and says, push the pause button. Look at who I am. Look at what I did, and look at the kind of life that I offer you. Because if you'll follow me, you will see things, you will experience things, you will live a life that you never thought possible. Now that sounds relatively good for many of us. Here's the challenge with this faith thing, with this belief thing. Belief isn't certainty. It's not even complete understanding. Belief is trust. It's not certainty. You know, we live in a culture and in a world, and really in the area where we live, we want to know the data. We want to know every single last point. We want to see how it works out. We want to understand where it goes. If we're honest, when we look at our lives, as much as we say that we believe in that kind of understanding, it's just not how it works. It's not how life is. But belief isn't that. It fundamentally is trust. It's saying, when I don't understand where this is going, I choose to trust. When I don't see how it all works out, I continue to choose to trust. I continue to look, in this case, to the one, Jesus, who says, I know where you've been. I know where that's brought you. But here today, I restore you, I recommission you, I call you back and I say, follow me where I am taking you and where I'm leading you to go. And so today, very simply, but profoundly, I'm inviting you to believe. I'm inviting you to trust. Maybe for you, it's the very first time. Easter is something that you do, and it's just a holiday that we all celebrate, and we all do it, and it's wonderful, and our kids love it. But maybe this is the day where that takes on a much more profound meaning for you, where you've heard this story before, but today is the day it becomes your story. Today is the day where you follow the one who raises all things to life, starting with himself, and gives you a hope that isn't based in circumstances, it isn't based in things turning out how we hope they'll turn out. It's based in the one who is there from the beginning and will be there all the way past the end, who we can follow and we can trust. Maybe today is the day where, as it says in the scriptures, you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe that God raised him from the dead, and you will be saved. Maybe that's you today. Maybe today, though, for all the rest of us who may have made that kind of a declaration, that kind of a confession at some point in our lives, it's starting over. It's saying, I've lived and you've been back there, God, and I know, but today is the day I choose to follow you again wherever it leads, trusting that you are the one who can take something and make something out of all of the pieces of my life that are in my box. The good, the bad, the ones we really like, the ones we wish nobody ever had to hear about, and can make something beautiful that lasts forever. And so today, wherever you are, I invite you to start over. Let's pray together. As I'm praying, I would invite our prayer team up to the front. God, we thank you for the importance, the impact, the reality of this day. For those of us who are followers of Jesus, this is like the pep rally day. But even for those of us who fit into that category, we look at the events and the circumstances of our lives and our world, and we try to figure out how it all fits together. And so I pray today that just as you did with Peter, you would do with us. You'd reach out your hand and say, do you love me? Can you trust me? Will you follow me? And maybe for some of us, this is a big deal. This is the moment, and there's something in our hearts or something in our minds or our souls. We can't explain it, but we just know that there's a moment here that's not to be missed. And so for maybe some of you today, it's more of a prayer like this. Jesus, I've sort of known the story. I've celebrated the holiday, but today is the day where it's going to be real for me. So I trust you. I trust you with my success. I trust you with my failure. I trust you with my hopes, my dreams. I trust you with my regrets. I trust you with my past, my present, and my future. I ask that you would forgive me of my sin. And I acknowledge you as the Savior of my soul and the Lord of my life. And going forward from this day, March 31st, 2024, I'll follow you wherever the path leads. We thank you, God, that every day is a day to start over, but today is a great day to begin again. I pray in Jesus' name. The worship team is going to sing a song. If you'd like prayer for anything, maybe you've prayed one of those prayers or something like that I have prayed, or your own version of that, I would not only invite you, I would encourage you to come up as we sing. Just take an opportunity to pray with somebody up here and take a next step, whatever that is. Maybe it's something you've been carrying. Maybe you're putting your faith and your hope in Jesus for the first time. They'll be up here in the front. And as we stand and as we sing, I would invite you to come forward and not leave this moment without having done business with Jesus.